Prime Minister's with us this morning. Prime Minister, good morning.
Good morning.
Have you been to visit a victim of one of these ram raids?
I have spoken to someone who's been a victim of a ram raid, and obviously I've seen a number of the incidences that you've been reporting on as well. They are atrocious, they are totally brazen, and of course you will have seen that the police have a dual focus, both in supporting retailers with the additional funding that we've put aside to put in preventative measures, but also ensuring that those who are taking part in these activities are held to account.
Who did you speak to and what did they tell you about what they want you to do?
I won't give individual details away about that just because, of course, I haven't sought their privacy to talk about it or their agreement. But in their case, they had since then put in preventative measures and hadn't had a repeat event. But as you can imagine, it would be a horrifying event. Thankfully, they weren't in the store at the time that it occurred. But it's just the brazenness of it and the total disregard for whether or not they could injure, but also the fact that these are people's businesses, these are their livelihoods. And as you've just explained, someone having a heart attack, the stress of something like this, it just defies belief. But of course, our focus has to be on what we do in response. We have seen a spike in ram raids, particularly in parts of the country, and that's where you've seen the police establishing their retail unit so that they can have a focus on ensuring that they are successfully prosecuting. We've had, just from that retail unit, I've seen the latest numbers, around 31 individuals and over 200 charges through that unit, which was only recently established. So there is a focus on this particular form of crime that we are seeing at the moment. What
are the consequences for these young people?
Well, it will very much depend on the individual circumstances. For instance, whether or not, you'll see in the end, sentencing if these are repeat offences. It all layers up, Ryan, so it will depend on the circumstances and the individuals. But we also want to make sure that we're preventing as well. So yes, making sure that people feel safe in their businesses. So we've started now the rollout of that program where, just like we did for fog cannons, remember when we had a spate of incidences where particularly cigarettes were being targeted, and so fog cannons were used as a safety measure. We've now tried to replicate that again to try and prevent what we now see around ram raids. But the prevention also needs to be around what do we do to stop young people, for whatever reason, entering into this kind of activity.
100%.
And so here we have particularly a group of ministers, education, social development, justice and police, who we've brought together to make sure that we are looking at all of the things that may be contributing to what we're seeing at the moment.
Those issues are for tomorrow, and I agree that's important. But for today, for those store owners, are there enough consequences? These young people are going in, they are committing crimes and robberies, and then they are maybe not even spending time in a police cell, and they're out there doing it again the next day. Is there a circuit breaker needed here? Do you need to have a consequence for ram raids and smash and grabs, or maybe a temporary measure whereby young people could be taken off the street for a period of time?
Well, there are consequences, and to say that, that, for instance, nothing happens, that is just incorrect, as I've said.
Why are the same people doing it over and over again?
And as I say, over 200 charges. And so,
but what do the charges result in?
And I can't speak to the individual circumstances of an individual offender. Probably useful to have, for instance, the police who are charging and involved in the prosecution to speak to that. It is fair to say, though, Ryan, that if someone is particularly young, if they are particularly young, efforts are often made to use consequences and punishment that don't, for instance, necessarily lead to that individual being in facilities that, for instance, then results in their continuing. In often cases, we do know that this is the case. If a young person enters into our formalised criminal justice system, that essentially means that's the trajectory they're on.
So in the meantime, we put up with ram raids and smash and grabs.
That is not to say that there are no consequences. No, not at all. I'm not arguing that for a moment, but it will depend on the age of the individual as to what occurs with that individual. But to say there is zero consequence, I would argue against.
OK, what about some help for those who are doing it tough on the front line, the businesses who have been affected? Some have said that their insurance premiums have skyrocketed because they're having to take into account the fact they are likely to be ram raided. Some told Retail New Zealand their premiums went from $5,000 a year to $30,000 a year. Will you help them with that cost?
Well, what we have been looking at is, and this is where I can't say for sure this would be the case, but I would expect that they would take into account, for instance, if you had preventative measures, if you had, for instance, bollards or screens, and those are the things that we've said that we're wanting to support. So we've put funding aside. We're working with retailers to make sure that we design a system that is agile enough to meet the needs of retailers who might be potentially at risk or have already experienced this. And I think from memory we assess that there'll be roughly 500 individual businesses who might be eligible in some of those target areas, and we've just started now rolling out that program.
Just coming back to the question though, which was about insurance premiums, are you open to helping with that?
And coming back to my answer, which is I would hope that when some of those measures are implemented for those businesses, that would be taken into account for premiums. In the same way that if you're an individual and you garage your car or you have security systems in your home, that's taken into account. Without knowing the full detail, that is what I would hope would occur.
The problem, Prime Minister, is that you put bollards up outside, the ram raids stop, the smash and grabs begin. It's the behaviour that doesn't change. So that may not be a solution for people and their insurance premiums. Can you just give us an answer? Are you open to helping people with their insurance premiums from a taxpayer point of view, or is that off the table?
Oh, that has not been part of what we've been working on to date, Ryan, because of course, you know, I can't speak here to the individual experience through premiums, but what we can do is support people with preventative measures that try and prevent these from occurring, and I would hope that these would to be taken into account by insurers.
All right. Prime Minister, the Leader of the Opposition, Chris Luxon, obviously had their annual conference in Christchurch at the weekend, and he said this about you. Take a listen.
Being in government isn't about telling people that you care. Saying you care while taking no meaningful action is empty. Caring means identifying the problem, devising a solution and getting things done.
He says you have a problem with taking accountability, Prime Minister, so I thought we would put that to the test this morning. Do you accept accountability that there are more kids living in cars this winter than when you came into office?
Ryan, that question requires more than a yes or no. Do I want anyone to be living in a car? No. Is it acceptable in a country as wealthy as New Zealand for people to be living in cars? No. But of course, the numbers that we use to measure that are when an individual comes forward to seek housing, we ask them, what are your current circumstances? And they will tell us if they're living in a car, and then we will move to get them into emergency housing or transitional housing or public housing. So when they come and tell us that, it doesn't mean necessarily that that is where they stay, but it will sometimes be the circumstances of those when they eventually or do come forward to seek support.
So you're saying there aren't 480 people living in their cars last month?
No, that's not what I just said. I said that when people came to see us, there were that many who recorded at the time that they sought housing, that their current circumstance was a car, and we have moved from that point to get them into housing. The moment that we know about those circumstances, we work to get them out of it.
Right, so none of those people...
Ryan, on accountability, you know, here's the difference between us and the last government on this. We didn't cap emergency housing special needs grants. So if people need help, we support them. We have quadrupled transitional housing. We've created 10,000 public housing spaces. You know, that's building more houses than any government since the 1970s. Do we still have need we're catching up on? Yes, we do. After 5 years, the ability to still build enough houses to clear that waiting list, we haven't been able to do yet. Had the last government built at the rate we are now, we would have almost cleared the public house waiting list. So I'm willing, absolutely, to be accountable and to respond to need. The problem is, unfortunately, the last government didn't.
So are you saying the 480 people who were living in a car last month are no longer living in a car because you've helped them into a home?
No, again, as I've just said, we moved then to support them into housing. Not everyone necessarily.
So are they in a house or not?
Will change their... the moment they come forward to us, that's when we start placing them. So that is absolutely at that point we try and get people out of their car.
So
Can I tell you what happened to every single individual on that list from the time it's reported? No, that would require us to go back through every single person's sort of circumstances.
So you do take accountability that the number of people in that situation has quadrupled since you came into office. You do take accountability for the fact that the situation hasn't got better, it's gotten worse.
But what I'm trying to share with you here, Ryan, is that previously, what was the incentive for someone to come forward when there was a cap on the help you could get? I don't think we truly understood the scale of the housing crisis that we had. I don't. Do we now? Yes, I think we have a better grip on it now. Is it fixed yet? No. Accountability is being willing to stand up and say that and keep driving to make sure that we get this solution.
But you're not saying that it's worse now. You're saying that people were too scared to come and tell you they were living in a car previously. That's not taking accountability.
Not necessarily scared, as one of the last Deputy Prime Minister used to say, you don't wait for a bus that isn't coming. You've got to make sure the support is there, that there's a point in coming forward that there will be housing available.
Or the 27,000 who are on a social housing wait list.
And again, Brian, here I think we're unfortunately talking past each other. You can't imply here for a moment that I'm not acknowledging that we have further housing need in this country. We absolutely do. But my point is that when you've quadrupled transitional housing and, yes, made available, more widely available, the ability for people to access emergency housing, special need grants, you will get a better picture of the problem we have. We continue, however, to build as fast as we can to make sure that we have a long-term sustainable solution.
OK, but just so that we are clear, you are being accountable this morning and saying that, yes, if you are a kid living in a motel, if you are living in a car in that situation, or if you are waiting for a community or social housing unit, you are in a worse position now than you were 5 years ago.
60,000 children have been lifted out of poverty under this government. Those are 60,000 kids who are in a better situation than they were 5 years ago. Does that mean 60,000 out? Of course, that is taken against where we were in 2017. So are we improving the circumstances for many families? Yes, we are. But the job is not done, Ryan, and I am not for a moment going to claim we have perfection in this country.
All right, Prime Minister, I really appreciate your time. We have to leave it there, unfortunately.